The delivery room smelled like antiseptic and fear. She was alone. No husband beside her. No hand to hold. Just the cold metal railing of a hospital bed and the sound of her own screaming tearing through the fluorescent-lit room like a prayer nobody was answering. Zuri Asantewaa had survived a lot of things in her 28 years on this earth. She had survived losing her mother at 16. She had survived moving from Accra to Seoul with nothing but a scholarship and a suitcase. She had survived falling in love with the most dangerous man in South Korea. But right now, in this moment, with her body splitting open from the inside and sweat soaking through her hospital gown, she was not sure she was going to survive Dr. Chae Minjun. "Will you shut up?" the doctor barked, turning from the tray of instruments with a look of pure, cold contempt on his face. "You are disturbing every patient on this floor. Control yourself." Zuri gasped between contractions, her fingers white-knuckled on the railing. "I am in labor. What do you want me to do, hum a lullaby?" That was when it happened. The slap. Open-palmed. Across her cheek. The room went completely silent. The nurse in the corner froze. The monitor beeped. Zuri's head turned slowly back, her eyes filling not with tears, but with something far more terrifying. "Come. You just made," she whispered, her voice low and deadly even through the pain, "the last mistake of your career." She reached for her phone with trembling fingers and typed one single message to the one contact saved under no name. Just a black diamond emoji. 3 words, room 4. No. 12 minutes later, the hospital's entire security system went dark. And the man who made kings kneel walked through the front doors. "Before we begin, my mum said this video cannot reach 10,000 views and 1,000 subscribers. Let's prove her wrong. Smash that like button, subscribe right now and drop in the comments where you are watching from." Now let's get into this story. 3 years earlier, Seoul had a particular way of humiliating newcomers. It did it quietly, through subway signs you couldn't read, through menus that made no sense, through the way people moved in perfect synchronized choreography around you while you stood in the middle of Hongik University Station like a lost comma in someone else's sentence. Zuri Asantewaa had been in South Korea for exactly 11 days. And the city had already tried to break her 4 times. Day 1. Her landlord pretended not to understand her deposit receipt and pocketed an extra 200,000 won. Day 3. A professor called her exotic in front of 40 students and seemed genuinely confused when she didn't smile. Day 7. She ordered what she thought was mild soup and cried for 40 minutes. Day 11. Today, a man in a 3-piece suit the color of midnight walked directly into her, sending her coffee, her acceptance letter, and her dignity flying across the marble lobby of Seojun Tower. "Ya." The word came out of her in pure Ghanaian reflex, which meant it came out loud, came out fast, and came out with zero concern for the fact that every single person in the lobby was now staring. The man looked down at her. His looked like she was a weather event he was mildly curious about. He was tall. Unfairly tall for someone whose job was apparently to assault women with coffee. His jaw was carved from something that had nothing to do with mercy, and his eyes, dark, still, and absolutely unreadable, moved from the coffee stain spreading across her white blouse to her face with the slow patience of someone who had never been rushed in their life. "You walked into me," he said. His voice was low, accented, precise. "Excuse me." Zuri pressed a hand to her chest. "Sir, I was standing still. You are the one who... I'm rarely wrong." She blinked. You just cut me off to tell me you're rarely wrong? About walking into me? Which you did." Something flickered across his face. Not quite a smile. Not quite anything she had a name for. "Kwon Seojun," he said, extending his hand like the last 60 seconds hadn't happened. Zuri stared at the hand. Then at him. Then back at the hand. "Is that an apology or an introduction?" "An introduction." "I'll wait for the apology." The lobby was very quiet. Somewhere behind her she heard someone inhale sharply. The man, Kwon Seojun, tilted his head exactly 3 degrees. Like a predator recalibrating. Like something in him had just woken up that hadn't been awake in a long time. "You're applying for the medical residency program," he said, glancing at the letter now crinkled in her hand. "Seojun Hospital." "My hospital." Zuri's stomach did something complicated. "Your hospital." "My building. My hospital. My lobby." His eyes moved back to hers. You're brave for talking to me the way you just did. I'm Ghanaian, she said, lifting her chin. We don't come factory set with the fear of rich men. 3 seconds of silence. Then he did something nobody in that lobby had apparently seen before. Kwon Seojun smiled. Not a big smile. Not even a full one. Just the corner of his mouth, barely there, like he was trying to keep it contained and losing by the smallest margin. The program starts Monday, he said, turning away. Don't be late. You don't even know if I got in, she called after him. He didn't turn around. You did. Zuri stood in the middle of the lobby, coffee-stained, breathless, holding a crumpled letter, and made a decision that would change the entire trajectory of her life. She decided she absolutely, positively, under no circumstances was going to fall for that man. She was wrong in under a week. The first week of residency at Seojun Hospital taught Zuri 3 things. 1. Korean hospital hierarchy was not a metaphor. It was a religion and the attendings were its high priests. 2. The coffee in the residence lounge tasted like it had been brewed during the Joseon dynasty and never refreshed. 3. Kwon Seojun did not simply own Seojun Hospital. He was Seojun Hospital. His presence moved through the building the way weather moved through an open field. Before you saw him, you felt the change in pressure. Staff straightened. Conversations dropped. Even the elevator seemed to arrive faster when he was waiting for it. Zuri refused to straighten for anyone. This created an immediate, blazing, professionally inconvenient problem. Dr. Asantewaa. His voice came from behind her on Wednesday morning, when she was elbow-deep in a chart and running on 3 hours of sleep and half a kimbap. She turned around. He was standing in the hallway in a charcoal suit, no tie, looking like he'd been assembled by someone with a grudge against ordinary people. Mr. Kwon, she said. It's early for a resident to be reviewing cardiac charts. It's early for a CEO to be wandering hospital hallways. I don't wander, he said. I move with intention. Zuri looked at him for one long moment. Did you come here to critique my vocabulary or my cardiology? Neither. He held out a badge. Her ID badge. She'd lost it yesterday and had spent 20 minutes retracing her steps through 4 floors. You left this in the radiology suite. He took it. Their fingers did not touch. She made absolutely sure of that. Thank you, she said with only moderate grudgingness. You're welcome, he said with the energy of someone who had just won something. She turned back to her chart. You graduated top of your class at University of Ghana Medical School, he said, not leaving. Published 2 papers before your 25th birthday. Turned down residency offers in London and Toronto to come here. Zuri kept her eyes on the chart. Is there a question in there somewhere? Why Seoul? She was quiet for a moment. Then, because nobody expected me to. She felt him go still behind her. That particular kind of stillness that meant she'd said something that landed differently than he expected. That's the only reason? He asked, his voice a half-degree quieter. That's the only reason I'm giving you on a Wednesday morning, she said pleasantly. She heard what might have been a quiet exhale. Almost, a laugh. There's a board dinner Friday, he said. Residents are expected to attend. I know. It's on the calendar. Wear something that doesn't have coffee on it. She spun around, but he was already walking away, and she could see from the back, the precise rigid effort of a man who was working very hard not to smile. Zuri pointed at the back of his head with her pen. I see you, she muttered. She didn't realize until later that the nurse at the station behind her had watched the whole thing with her mouth open, because in 4 years of working at Seojun Hospital, she had never once seen Kwon Seojun come to a residence floor for anything. Let alone return a badge. Let alone stay to talk. The rumors started by lunch. Zuri heard them at the resident table. Whispered, urgent, delicious. And she did what any sensible, focused, career-driven woman would do. She ate her rice, said absolutely nothing, and told herself very firmly that the warm feeling in her chest was indigestion. It was not indigestion. The board dinner was held in a private room on the 52nd floor of Seojun Tower, and Zuri walked in wearing a deep burgundy wrap dress that she'd bought 3 years ago for her cousin's graduation and had never had occasion to wear. She looked extraordinary and she knew it. Not because she was vain, though she was a little in the healthy Ghanaian way her aunties had raised her to be, but because she'd caught her own reflection in the elevator and thought, Auntie Abina would approve. The room was full of powerful people being very careful with their faces. Zuri had spent enough time around academia to recognize the performance of wealth. The way people smiled with their mouths and calculated with their eyes. She was scanning the room for the other residents, who she planned to cluster with immediately and use as a social shield, when a hand appeared at the edge of her vision holding a glass of sparkling water. She turned. Seojun was standing beside her. He'd changed into a suit that was somehow darker than dark, and he was looking at the room the way she was, like an observer, not a participant. "You're doing it too," she said quietly, taking the water. "Doing what?" "Watching instead of performing." He looked at her sidelong. Something in his expression shifted. Subtle, almost imperceptible, like a door opening 1 centimeter. "Most people at these events don't notice the difference. I grew up in a house full of women who survived by reading rooms," she said. "My mother, my grandmother, my 4 aunties. I could read a room before I could read a book." "Your mother taught you that?" "A bit. She did before she passed." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that happened when someone said something true in a room full of performance, and the truth needed a moment to breathe. "I'm sorry," he said, and unlike most people who said those words, he said it like he meant the specific weight of them. "She was extraordinary," Zuri said simply. "I try to be." "You are," he said. She turned to look at him fully. He was looking at the room again, jaw set, expression neutral, as if he hadn't just said the 2 most quietly devastating words of her evening. "Was that a compliment, Kwon Seojun?" "It was an observation. You're going to be very annoying to know, I can already tell." This time the corner of his mouth moved. She was beginning to catalog that smile, the different versions of it. This one was the version that meant she'd surprised him. "Dinner is starting," he said, straightening. "Is there a seating chart?" "Yes." "Am I next to you?" A pause that was half a second too long. "Yes." Zuri looked up at the ceiling briefly, said a small internal prayer for her professional boundaries, and followed him to the table. Dinner lasted 3 hours. They argued quietly about cardiology funding for 40 minutes. He was wrong about 2 things and she told him so directly with citations, and he listened, actually listened, and then said, "Adjust the proposal. I'll approve the budget." Just like that. She stared at him. "You can do that? I own the hospital." "But I argued with you. You were right." He picked up his chopsticks. "I don't punish people for being right." Zuri sat with that for a moment. In her experience, powerful men did exactly that. They punished competence that embarrassed them. They shrank rooms to fit their egos. This man had just handed her a budget approval over dinner chopsticks because she'd out-argued him. He was in so much trouble. "Okay," she said carefully. "Thank you." "Stop thanking me." "I'll stop thanking you when you stop doing things worth thanking." He looked at her. She looked at him. The candle between them flickered. Somewhere across the table, a board member leaned to his colleague and whispered something. The colleague looked at Zuri and Seojun and raised his eyebrows. Neither of them noticed. They were too busy pretending they weren't staring at each other. Zuri found out about the Mafia on a Sunday. She found out the way you found out about most catastrophic things. Gradually, then all at once, with a very inconvenient amount of feelings already involved. It started with a call at 6 a.m. She was in the hospital's on-call room, half conscious, still in scrubs, when her phone buzzed. Not her personal phone. The small secondary phone she'd been given 2 weeks ago by a very serious man in a black coat who had simply appeared at her apartment door and said, "Mr. Kwon asks that you keep this charged." She'd stared at the phone. Then at the man. Then at the phone again. "Why?" she'd asked. "In case he needs to reach you. He has my regular number. This line is secure." She'd taken the phone because the alternative was an argument with a man who looked like he'd never lost one. Now it was buzzing. She grabbed it. "Can you come to the East Wing? Not as a doctor. As yourself." She stared at the message for 10 seconds. "Who gets injured at 6 a.m. on a Sunday?" she typed back. "People in my line of work." She was there in 4 minutes. The East Wing of Seojin Hospital's private floor was not on any official hospital map. You needed a specific elevator code and a specific face. Hers had apparently been added to the system because the elevator opened without a key card, and when she stepped out, there were 2 men in the hallway who nodded at her like they'd been expecting her. Seojun was sitting on the edge of a bed. He had a gash across his left forearm, clean, deep, professional. The kind made by someone who knew what they were doing. His jacket was folded on the chair. His shirt was rolled to the elbow. His face was completely, absolutely, infuriatingly composed. "I thought you said you weren't a doctor right now," he said when he saw her. "I lied." She crossed the room, grabbed gloves from the cabinet, and started examining the wound with hands that were steadier than she felt. "What happened?" "Business disagreement. Business disager." She stopped. Took a breath. Started suturing. "You're going to need to give me more than that." "Why?" "Because you sent for me at 6 in the morning to a secret hospital floor guarded by men who make eye contact like it's a threat, Seojun." It was the first time she'd used just his name. Without the title. They both heard it. "I run certain operations," he said carefully, "that exist outside conventional business." Her hands didn't stop moving. "How far outside?" A long pause. "Far." She tied off the suture. Set down the tool. Pulled off her gloves. Then she sat in the chair across from him and looked at him the way she'd been trained to look at patients who were about to receive difficult news. Direct, steady, present. "Are you a criminal?" she asked. "By some definitions." "What definitions would those be?" "Government ones." Zuri exhaled through her nose. "Kwon Seojun." "Zuri. Are people going to try to hurt you again?" He looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes. Something she couldn't name yet but would spend the next 2 years learning to read. "Probably." "Are you going to tell me when it happens?" Another pause. Longer. Like the answer cost him something. "I don't usually tell people things. I'm not people." 3 seconds. "No," he said quietly. "You're not." Zuri stood up, gathered the medical waste and made a decision in the space between one breath and the next. The same way she made all her important decisions. Quickly, completely, and with full awareness that she might be making a magnificent mistake. "I need breakfast," she said. "If you're going to explain to me that you're secretly a crime lord, you're doing it over food. I don't process life-altering information on an empty stomach." She walked toward the door. "There's a place 2 blocks from here," he said from behind her. "Private. Good job. Lead the way, crime lord." She didn't see his face. But she absolutely heard, the quiet sound of a man laughing for the first time in a very long time. They fell in love the way most inconvenient things happened. In the in-between moments. Not during the grand gesture or the dramatic confession. Between those things. In the negative space where people reveal themselves without meaning to. It happened over Juk on a Sunday morning when he explained the Kwon organization in the same measured tone most men used to describe quarterly earnings, and she sat across from him with a spoon in her hand and said, "So you're basically a shadow government for people the actual government abandoned. I've seen worse career choices." He had stared at her for so long she'd started to think she'd broken him. "Most people," he said finally, "react differently to this information. Most people weren't raised by a woman who ran the largest informal credit union in Accra while raising 6 kids and never once asked for permission." She pointed her spoon at him. "I don't scare easy, Seojun." It happened on a Tuesday evening when she was in the hospital garden eating plantain chips she'd guilt-tripped a Ghanaian restaurant in Itaewon into stocking, and he appeared out of nowhere and sat beside her on the bench and didn't say anything for 5 full minutes, and she didn't ask him to. And somehow that silence was the most intimate thing that had happened to her in Seoul. "Bad day," she finally said. "Complicated day. Want chips?" He took one. "These are sweet." "That's how you eat them, yes." He took another. She let him. It happened on a Thursday night when she was on hour 19 of a shift and he found her asleep sitting up in the residence lounge with a textbook open in her lap. And when she startled awake he was sitting across from her in a chair that was much too small for him, working on his tablet, keeping quiet company. "How long have you been there?" she demanded. "An hour." "Why?" He looked up from his tablet. "You looked like you might fall off the chair. So you just sat there? You needed to sleep. You wouldn't have if you'd known I was here." She looked at him in the low light of the empty lounge, exhausted and warm and confused and completely helplessly certain. "Seojun," she said softly. I'm going to kiss you." He went very still. "I'm giving you warning," she said, "because I'm considerate like that." "Zuri." 3 seconds. "This is unprofessional." 2. "You work at my hospital." 1. He kissed her first. Not the way she'd expected, careful, exploratory, testing the edges of something new. He kissed her the way he did everything, with complete, devastating intention. Like a decision that had already been made and was only now being executed. She made a small sound of surprise against his mouth that she would deny until her death. When they separated, his forehead dropped to hers. His hands, large, warm, slightly calloused in places she hadn't expected, were on her face like she was something that required careful handling. I have been, he said very quietly, trying not to do that for 3 months. How's that been going for you? Terribly. She laughed. Full and real and loud in the empty lounge. And Kwon Seojun, head of the most feared criminal organization in South Korea, man who made gangsters step aside in hallways, tucked her laugh away somewhere inside himself like it was the most valuable thing he'd ever acquired. Which it was. There were adjustments, of course. Dating the head of a shadow empire came with a specific set of logistical considerations that no relationship book had prepared Zuri for. The security detail for one. She noticed them the week after the kiss. Quiet, professional, always at a slight distance. A man at the coffee shop. A woman near the hospital entrance. She wasn't supposed to notice them. She noticed them on day 2. You assigned me guards, she said that evening, standing in his penthouse apartment, which was enormous and almost entirely black and gray and desperately needed a throw pillow, with her arms crossed. Protection, he said, not looking up from his desk. Seojun. He looked up. I run into burning buildings professionally, she said. I don't need babysitters. You need people who will ensure that what happened to my arm doesn't happen to you. She stopped. Sat with that. Okay, that's actually reasonable. Thank you. I still don't like it. I know. Can they be less obvious? He almost smiled. I'll speak to them. The adjustments were small but significant. She learned to text the Black Diamond before going anywhere new. She learned which questions he'd answer directly and which ones needed to be approached sideways, like skittish animals. She learned that he showed love in a language that had no spoken words, in problems solved before she mentioned them, in preferences memorized and executed without fanfare, in the particular quality of his attention that made her feel like the only thing in any room worth looking at. And he learned her. He learned that she processed stress by cooking enormous amounts of Ghanaian food and distributing it to the hospital staff. He learned that she called her grandmother in Accra every Sunday morning and switched entirely into Twi and laughed in a completely different register. Lighter, younger, unguarded. He learned that she was ferociously, almost violently competent at her work and needed him to acknowledge it and not manage it. He learned to stay out of her professional lane and never once tried to leverage his ownership of the hospital on her behalf. Because she had told him once very clearly, if I get anything at this hospital, I get it on merit or I don't get it. Understood, he'd said. I'm serious. I know you are. I will be very irritated. You are often irritating, he said. She threw a cushion at him. He caught it with one hand, with the reflexes of a man who had survived much worse projectiles, and set it aside with a look of such dignified composure that she fell a little more in love with him right there. They went on real dates. Deliberately, defiantly normal dates. A jimjilbang where she complained about the heat for 20 minutes and then fell asleep on his shoulder for 2 hours. A food market in Mangwon where she made him eat 3 things he'd never tried and he ate all of them without complaint while watching her react to each food stall like it was a small personal miracle. A late-night drive along the Han River where they sat on the hood of his absurdly expensive car in the dark and she told him about her mother. Really told him the full version with all the loss in it, and he held her hand and didn't try to fix it. Just held her hand. That was the night she knew it wasn't falling anymore. She'd already landed. 8 months in, Zuri sat in a bathroom in Seojun's penthouse at 7 in the morning, holding something small and plastic and tried to remember how to breathe. The test was positive. She sat on the cold marble floor with her back against the cabinet and had a full, private, extremely honest conversation with herself that covered shock, fear, joy, logistical terror, more joy, the specific anxiety of being a Ghanaian woman carrying a Korean crime lord's baby in Seoul, more joy, and then a very focused internal review of her maternal health knowledge. He was a doctor. She knew exactly what this meant and exactly what it required and exactly how to take care of herself. She was also, in this specific moment, just a woman on a bathroom floor. She let herself have 5 minutes of that. Then she stood up, washed her face, straightened her spine the way her grandmother had taught her. Shoulders like you own the room, Zuri, because you do, and walked out into the kitchen where Seojun was making tea. He looked at her face. He set down the cup. Zuri. So, she said, her voice only slightly unsteady. You know how you said you wanted more complicated things in your life? I've never said that. It was implied. She set the test on the counter between them. The silence lasted 4 seconds. Then Kwon Seojun, who had never in the memory of anyone who worked for him, shown an unguarded emotion in a professional setting, sat down on a kitchen stool and put his face in his hands. Zuri panicked. Seojun. He looked up. He was not composing himself. He was not managing a reaction. He was just feeling it. Fully. All of it, right there on his face, uncontained and unfamiliar, like a man experiencing weather for the first time. Come here, he said. She went. He pulled her between his knees and held her. Really held her, both arms, face pressed into her hair, and she felt the exhale move through his entire body like something had been released that had been held a very long time. Are you scared? He asked against her hair. Terrified, she said into his chest. You. Yes. Pause. And the other thing. She pulled back to look at him. His expression, stripped of every professional layer, every careful management, was something she had never seen on his face before and would spend the rest of her life trying to deserve. The other thing, she said softly. He touched her face. Just his thumb. Across her cheekbone. The best thing I've ever been scared of, he said. Zuri pressed her face back into his chest so he wouldn't see her cry. She absolutely cried. The pregnancy was not simple. Not because of medical complications. Zuri's body, as she informed anyone who looked at her with concern, was doing exactly what it was supposed to do, and she was not interested in unsolicited worry. The complications were political. At 7 months, a rival organization made a move against the Kwon Empire that forced Seojun into 3 weeks of what he called active management, and what Zuri called the most terrifying month of my life that I am not allowed to ask about. He came home every night. She made him show her both hands each time. He let her. He understood that this was how she counted him present, how she kept the fear at a manageable size. She transferred to the high-risk OB unit at a different hospital for her delivery. A private facility on the other side of Seoul, away from Seojun and its complicated politics. This was where she encountered Dr. Chae Minjun. He was 53, the kind of doctor who had stopped seeing patients as people sometime in the previous decade and had never noticed the transition. He was technically excellent and humanly hollow, the particular combination that medicine occasionally produced and never adequately addressed. He did not like Zuri. He didn't like her confidence. He didn't like that she reviewed her own file and asked specific, informed questions. He didn't like that when he gave her information she processed it immediately as a peer rather than deferring as a patient. He expressed this through small hostilities, delayed responses, clipped instructions, a tone that said you are inconvenient every time he walked into her room. Zuri had encountered worse. She documented everything with the meticulous precision of a woman who had grown up hearing always have evidence, and she managed him with the same clinical distance she used for difficult cases. She had not told him who her husband was. Seojun had offered once to make the connection clear. She had refused. I'm not using your name to get decent medical treatment, she'd said. I'm a doctor. I know my rights and I know the standard of care. I don't need your reputation to protect me. He had looked at her with that expression, the one that meant you are the most remarkable thing I have ever encountered and also you give me stress-related chest pain, and said, okay. But have security standing by, she'd added. Already arranged. The night of her labor, Seojun had been 40 minutes away at a meeting that could not, at the critical moment, be safely abandoned without creating the kind of visible gap that hostile parties watched for. She told him to stay. He was fine. He was a doctor. She was not, as it turned out, fine, not because of the labor which was progressing well, but because of Dr. Chae Minjun, who had been on hour 14 of a shift when he walked into room 4 and encountered a woman screaming through a contraction with the full force of her lungs and her body and her completely reasonable human pain. Will you shut up? The slap. The silence. The 3 words to the black diamond contact. No. The hospital's security system didn't just go dark. It went dark quietly. That was the part that would later disturb the investigators. Not that it happened, but how. No alarms. No emergency lights. No triggered protocols. Every camera, every lock, every motion sensor simply stopped, in a polite, orderly sequence that suggested whoever had done it found the whole thing mildly beneath them. The front desk staff looked up from their monitors to find them blank. And then the doors opened. Kwon Seojun walked in like he'd been built specifically for this hallway. He was in the suit he'd worn to the meeting. Charcoal, immaculate, not a thread out of place. With an expression so quiet and so cold that the security guard who moved to intercept him stopped 3 feet away without entirely understanding why. 2 men came in behind him. Then 2 more. Nobody spoke. He walked to the elevator. It opened immediately. His team had already resolved the keycard issue, and he rode it to the 4th floor. Room 4 was at the end of the corridor. He paused outside the door. Through it, Zuri's voice, still strong, still sharp even through the pain. I need a different doctor and I need one now, and if someone doesn't get me one in the next 2 minutes I'm going to deliver this baby myself and then I'm going to file every report available to me, which as a physician is quite a few. Seojun exhaled. She was okay. She was fighting, which meant she was okay because Zuri Asantewaa only got louder when she was winning. He opened the door. The room. A nurse pressed against the far wall, a monitor, a bed, the bright overhead lights. Zuri, elevated, fierce, cheeks still red from the handprint. A doctor, mid-50s, gray at the temples, wearing the particular expression of a man who had not yet been shown the full consequence of his choices. Zuri saw him first. Something crossed her face. Relief, anger on his behalf, a love so fierce it almost hurt to witness, and then she schooled it back into composure, which was the bravest thing he'd seen all week. You're late, she said. I'm here, he said. He turned to Dr. Chae Minjun. The doctor looked at the men in the doorway. Then at Seojun's face. Something in his chest understood something his brain was still catching up to. Sir, he started. Don't, said one of the men near the door, not unkindly. Seojun crossed the room to Zuri. He took her hand, the one that was white-knuckled on the railing, and held it, and she squeezed hard enough to hurt, and he let her. He struck me, she said quietly. For his ears. Document it. Already being handled. I want the formal complaint filed by morning. Done. And I want a new doctor. Dr. Song is on her way up. 12 years maternal fetal medicine, trained in London. He paused. She's very good. Of course you already had someone. I had 5 options. I narrowed it while I was in the elevator. Zuri looked at him. Exhausted, furious, in pain, overwhelmingly herself. I told you not to use your name for my medical treatment. I used it for your safety. Different category. He brought her hand to his mouth. We can argue about the taxonomy later. She made a sound that was half laugh, half contraction and gripped his hand harder. Hey, he said softly just to her. Hey, she said back. Behind them, Dr. Chae Minjun was being quietly, thoroughly and irrevocably removed from the hospital. Not dragged, not threatened, simply escorted with the particular efficiency of people who had done harder things and found this almost restful. His career would be finished by Monday morning. Not through violence. Through paperwork. Through the 12 complaints that had apparently existed in suppressed files for 6 years. Suddenly and simultaneously surfacing. Through the medical board. Through the review committee. Through every clean, legal, devastating channel available to a man who had spent 15 years building infrastructure specifically for moments like this. The nurse in the corner had not moved. Seojun glanced at her. You can go, he said. His voice was not unkind. Dr. Song will want the room prepped. The nurse nodded and left, and as she passed through the door she looked back once. At the man holding the laboring woman's hand like it was the only task that existed in the world, and thought that whatever she'd imagined when she'd heard Mafia boss, it had not been this. It had not been this. Seojun, Zuri said. Yes. I'm going to need you to talk to me. Her hand tightened. Tell me something. What do you want to hear? Anything. Something real. A breath through a contraction. Distract me. He was quiet for 3 seconds. And then Kwon Seojun, who communicated primarily through action and silence and the occasional devastating economy of words, said, The first day I saw you in the lobby. You were standing in the middle of the floor holding that letter and the coffee was on your blouse and you turned around when I walked into you and you looked at me like I was a problem you were already solving. He watched her face. I thought, I've been waiting for someone like this without knowing I was waiting. Zuri's breath hitched. Not from pain. You've been holding that for 3 years, she said. Longer than that. Kwon Seojun. Eyes on me, he said. Dr. Song is almost here. You're almost there. He pressed his lips to her temple. You've done harder things than this. You don't know that. I know you. Same thing. And then, a sound. Small. Furious. Utterly unimpressed with the world it had just arrived in. The most important sound in any room. Seojun's hand still holding hers tightened. Zuri laughed, full, real, overwhelming, and the tears came down her face and she didn't wipe them and he didn't tell her to and the room was full of a sound like the beginning of something. Dr. Song held up the baby, small, perfect, already announcing grievances at high volume. A girl, she said. Zuri turned to look at Seojun. He was looking at the baby. His face was doing the thing again, the uncontained thing, the unmanaged thing. Every wall down. Every layer gone. She's loud, he said and his voice was not steady. Of course she is, Zuri said. She's mine. He looked at Zuri then. And in that look was every version of everything. The lobby, the dinner, the bathroom floor, the Sunday mornings, the hand-holding, the 3 words at 6 in the morning, the whole complicated, extraordinary architecture of them. And mine, he said. 3 hours later, when the room was quiet and the baby was in Zuri's arms and Seojun was in the chair he had not moved from, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it. His second in command. 3 words, IT found you. He looked at Zuri. At the baby. At the specific, irreplaceable thing in this room that he would burn down every empire to protect. He typed back. Coming. You have to go, Zuri said. Not a question. She'd seen his face. An hour. Maybe 2. Seojun. He stood. He kissed her forehead. Then the baby's. What's her name? Dr. Song asked from the doorway. They hadn't decided. Zuri looked at Seojun. He looked at her. Afia, Zuri said. The Twi word for born on Friday. Born into love. Born into the fullness of something. Afia Kwon, Seojun said, testing it in his mouth like it was the first true thing he'd ever said. Go, Zuri said softly. Come back. Always, he said. He walked to the door. And stopped. Zuri. The man in the lobby. When they escorted him out tonight. His back was to her. His voice was very quiet. He had a visitor 2 days ago. Someone paid him to be assigned to your case. The room went cold. Seojun. It's not random, he said. Someone knows about you. About us. About her. He turned around one last time. His face was the face of the CO, the crime lord, the man who made cities quiet. But his eyes were the man in the kitchen. The man on the bathroom floor. The man in the chair. I will handle it, he said. But Zuri. He stopped. This isn't over. The door closed. Zuri held her daughter in the silence and thought about what it meant to love someone dangerous. Not the danger you could see. The kind you couldn't. Somewhere in the hospital a phone was still ringing. Somewhere in the city, someone who knew their daughter's name was watching a black car pull out of a parking structure. And somewhere, a story that had started in a lobby with spilled coffee and 2 people pretending not to be fascinated by each other, was about to become something else entirely. End of part 1. Afia Kwon has entered the world. Someone was paid to hurt her mother. And the most dangerous man in South Korea just walked out of a hospital room and into a war. Who sent that visitor? What do they want with Zuri and the baby? And what happens when the woman who doesn't scare easy meets the one thing in the world that finally scares her? Part 2 is coming. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Drop a comment. Who's your favorite character so far? And tell me, do you trust Seojun to bring himself home?